The machine that would be known as the M10 tank destroyer was born from a fundamental tactical shift in American military doctrine. The initial concept rejected the idea that tanks should fight other tanks, viewing them instead as tools for infantry support and exploitation. This responsibility for eliminating enemy armor was instead delegated to a specialized and highly mobile force, the Tank Destroyer Command. Their guiding philosophy was not to meet the enemy head-on but to strike with speed and overwhelming firepower from prepared positions. The resulting vehicle, the M10, was essentially a modified M for Sherman chassis, chosen for its reliability and the sheer volume of production it allowed. It featured a newly designed, but often criticized, open-top turret to provide maximum visibility for the crew, which was deemed essential for the shoot-and-scoot tactics they would employ. Its main armament was the powerful 3-inch, 76.2 mm M7 gun, a significant upgrade from the M4's original short-barreled main cannon. This long-barreled weapon could fire a high-velocity armor-piercing round, capable of penetrating the frontal armor of most German tanks it was expected to encounter in the early phases of the war. Production ramped up with the full force of America's industrial might, symbolizing the arsenal of democracy that President Roosevelt had famously championed. Thousands of these tank destroyers, officially named the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, were quickly rolled off the assembly lines and shipped across the Atlantic to equip the burgeoning American forces. This rapid deployment was crucial because the Allies knew a direct confrontation with the armored formations of the Wehrmacht was inevitable once the invasion of Europe began. The M10 was thus a compromise, a vehicle designed for a specific doctrine, built for mass production, and armed with the best anti-tank weapon immediately available to combat the growing German threat. It was a tool of necessity and a testament to the urgency of preparing for the brutal armored warfare that awaited them on the continent. The crews who trained with these vehicles believed implicitly in the doctrine of mobility, knowing their thinner armor meant they could not afford to sustain a protracted firefight against a heavily protected German opponent. They were trained to be hunters, not brawlers, mastering the art of the sudden, devastating ambush. The American manufacturing capacity became the silent partner in every engagement fought by the M10. The sheer numbers of these vehicles allowed the U.S. Army to saturate the front, compensating for individual technological deficits. This mass production strategy became a cornerstone of the Allied victory, outproducing the more complex and time-consuming German designs. The open top was a philosophical statement, prioritizing the crew's vision and tactical speed over their physical protection. This design philosophy starkly contrasted with the heavy, enclosed tanks favored by the German army. The M10 was a product of pragmatism, a fast solution to a desperate need for effective anti-tank capability. The 3-inch gun's power was a welcome shock to American forces, who had struggled with earlier, less capable anti-tank weapons. Every M10 that rolled off the line was a commitment to the doctrine of the mobile defense, a plan to defeat the German blitzkrieg with speed and cunning. The crews understood their role as specialized anti-tank assassins, not frontline battle tanks. Their training instilled a reliance on concealment and rapid displacement after firing. This foundational vehicle laid the groundwork for all future American tank destroyers in the European theater. The M10's primary adversary in the field would become the German Panther tank, an armored beast that redefined the battlefield's power dynamic. Developed in response to the shock of encountering the Soviet Tu-34 on the Eastern Front, the Panther was a marvel of mid-war German engineering. Its sloped frontal armor was a revolutionary design feature, effectively deflecting incoming rounds and making it notoriously difficult to penetrate at range. This superior protection was paired with the lethal 7.5 cm kilowatt K42L A70 gun, a weapon with a high muzzle velocity that could punch clean through the frontal armor of the standard M for Sherman from over a mile away. The Panther was a true apex predator, combining speed, protection, and unparalleled firepower into a single terrifying package. When Allied forces landed in Normandy, they quickly realized they were facing a significant technological deficit in the realm of tank-on-tank combat. The M10, with its powerful M7 gun, was one of the few American armored vehicles capable of even challenging the Panther, but the engagement terms had to be set with extreme prejudice. The Panther's thick, sloped glacis was often proof against the M10 standard armor-piercing rounds unless the shot landed at a perfect, square-on angle. This meant the M10 crews had to eschew any notion of a fair fight, understanding that their survival depended on outwitting their opponent. The contrast in design philosophy was stark. The Panther was built to dominate open-field combat, rolling forward and destroying targets before they could react. The M10 was a glass cannon, built to be concealed, to wait, and to deliver a single, killing blow before vanishing back into the landscape. The crews of the tank destroyers became intimately familiar with the Panther's vulnerabilities, primarily its thinner side and rear armor, the only reliable targets for the 3-inch gun. This knowledge cemented the necessity of their tactical doctrine. They could not meet the Panther frontally but had to force the engagement onto their own terms. The M10 became the dedicated hunter, and the Panther its heavily armored, but not invincible, prey, leading to a deadly and asymmetric struggle for supremacy on the battlefields of Western Europe. The high muzzle velocity of the Panther's main gun gave it an incredible advantage in long-range duels. Its superior optics and fire control only amplified this technological edge. The M10, conversely, had to rely on its crew's superior training and battlefield cunning. They had to turn the battle into a close-quarters ambush, negating the Panther's range advantage. Every engagement was a desperate game of cat and mouse, with the M10 constantly maneuvering for the perfect flank shot. The term glass cannon perfectly described the M10, capable of delivering a killing blow but unable to survive one in return. As the M10 tank destroyer made its appearance on the front lines, it quickly became an object of derision among the professional tank crews of the German army, particularly the elite SS Panzer divisions. The American approach to anti-tank warfare, relying on a dedicated, thinly armored vehicle, seemed fundamentally flawed to the Germans, whose own tank development prioritized massive armor and a heavy main gun. The Panther and the mighty Tiger tanks were seen as the gold standard, and the M10 looked like a hastily converted, poor cousin in comparison. SS officers, accustomed to the protection of their superior armor, openly mocked the M10's high silhouette and its most glaring vulnerability, the open-top turret. They scornfully referred to it as a half-track tank or a soft-skinned curiosity, believing that any vehicle whose crew was exposed to shrapnel, snipers, and artillery bursts was an amateurish design. This disdain was rooted in their doctrine, which dictated that a vehicle engaging in anti-tank combat must have enough armor to survive the return fire, a trait the M10 conspicuously lacked. The exposure of the crew was considered a critical weakness that made the vehicle easy prey for coordinated infantry and armored assaults. Furthermore, the M10's 3-inch gun, while respectable, was quickly becoming obsolescent against the thickest armor of the later model German tanks. German intelligence often underestimated the M10's potential, focusing on its flaws rather than its strengths. They saw a slow, tall vehicle with an easily penetrated hull and a crew that could be eliminated by a well-placed grenade or a heavy mortar barrage. This initial German confidence was a dangerous psychological weapon for the Allied forces, as overconfidence often leads to tactical mistakes. The SS, in their arrogance, frequently pushed forward recklessly, trusting in their superior armor to carry the day, a belief that the M10 crews were about to shatter. The early battles would be a brutal awakening for the Panzer commanders, as they learned that the M10's weaknesses were inseparable from its lethal doctrine. The Germans viewed the open top as an insult to the professional soldier, a clear sign of poor engineering. They believed the M10's doctrine of shoot and scoot was an admission of its inherent inferiority in a stand-up fight. The M10's distinctive silhouette, which seemed to rise high above the terrain, made it an easy target in the eyes of the German tank gunners. This hubris, however, blinded them to the M10's tactical flexibility and its crew's dedication. The comparison to the Tu-34-76, an earlier tank they had once dismissed, was a deeply ironic touch. The tank destroyer crews heard the mockery through captured documents and prisoner interrogations, fueling their resolve. This German disdain would eventually turn into a grudging respect, but only after suffering catastrophic losses. The psychological warfare began not with a shot, but with a sneer from the German side. The true test of the tank destroyer doctrine and the M10 itself came immediately following the Normandy landings, a chaotic period known as the Battle of the Hedgerows. The dense, walled-off fields of the Bocage country proved to be an utterly unique and unforgiving battlefield, perfectly suited for defensive warfare. German forces used the terrain to their advantage, turning every field into a miniature fortress where their heavy armor could lie in wait. It was here, in the narrow lanes and claustrophobic corners of Normandy, that the M10 units first faced the terrifying reality of the Panther. The first engagements were a bloody learning curve. M10s that maneuvered too aggressively or attempted a frontal assault were quickly neutralized by the Panther's long-range accuracy and crushing power. However, the tank destroyer crews rapidly adapted, turning the very terrain that favored the German defense into a tool for their own specialized offensive. The narrow fields and limited visibility negated much of the Panther's superior range, forcing the engagements into the closer quarters that the M10 could better exploit. They began to utilize the thick hedges as natural curtains, preparing ambush points where they could catch the Panthers in the flanks or at the junction of two roads. The M10's open top, initially a weakness, unexpectedly became an advantage by providing superior situational awareness in the confusing terrain. Commanders could quickly spot targets, direct fire, and communicate with accompanying infantry, all without the delay of opening hatches. This rapid battlefield awareness allowed them to maintain the initiative, striking at a moving column or a momentary pause in the German advance. This period was a brutal baptism, cementing the M10 crew's reputation for courage and tactical shrewdness. They were not fighting a fair war, but they were mastering the art of the decisive, short-range counterattack that turned the tables on the arrogant German tank crews. The Bocage was a landscape of sudden death, where the next field could hide either a Panther or an M10 ambush. Visibility was often limited to a few dozen yards, nullifying the Panther's magnificent gun range. M10 crews quickly learned that patience was their best armor, waiting for the enemy to make the fatal mistake of exposure. The hedges served as both cover and a perfect masking screen for their movements. Lessons learned were often written in the blood of their comrades, forcing a rapid evolution of tactics. The doctrine shifted from a purely linear defense to an aggressive, fluid defense based on localized ambushes. The coordination with accompanying infantry became paramount for spotting and protecting the vulnerable M10s. The Battle of the Hedgerows proved that doctrine and crew skill could overcome a clear technological disparity. The M10's low-pressure suspension, adapted from the Sherman, was surprisingly good at traversing the difficult terrain. The combination of the M10's firepower and the blockage environment was a lethal surprise for the invading Germans. The American tank destroyer doctrine hinged on the principle of massed, mobile fire, meaning the M10 was never intended to hunt alone. The fundamental unit of engagement was the platoon or company, operating as a coordinated pack of predators whose combined firepower could overcome a superior single target. When a Panther was spotted, the tank destroyer crew's training kicked in. A single vehicle would draw the enemy's attention, while a second, often concealed, vehicle maneuvered to deliver the killing blow from the side or rear. This deliberate teamwork exploited the M10's superior mobility compared to the heavier German tanks, allowing the entire unit to fluidly shift positions after firing. The doctrine specifically trained the crews to use shoot-and-scoot tactics, emphasizing that a static M10 was a dead M10. After delivering a volley of high-velocity rounds, the tank destroyers would immediately move to an alternate, pre-selected firing position, confusing the German gunners and preventing effective counterfire. This constant motion made it incredibly difficult for the slow traverse turrets of the Panthers and Tigers to track and engage them effectively. The German tankers, accustomed to engaging the more statically minded M4 Shermans, were often caught off guard by the aggressive, almost guerrilla-like tactics of the tank destroyers. Radio communication was absolutely vital to this pack hunting method, allowing commanders to coordinate fire plans and manage the entire unit's repositioning under pressure. The most successful M10 units quickly established a reputation for disciplined and rapid responses, often setting up interlocking fields of fire that could completely envelop an unsuspecting German armored thrust. The synergy of the entire unit, with its multiple 3-inch guns concentrating on a single point, was the tactical equalizer that compensated for the M10's relatively weaker individual firepower against a Panther's frontal armor. The German officers' mockery began to fade as their best tanks started falling victim to these carefully orchestrated, multi-vehicle ambushes. The concept of a wolf pack attack became the M10's signature move in the field. One M10 would act as bait, deliberately exposing itself for a moment to draw the Panther's attention and fire. The flanking M10s would then use that momentary distraction to place their critical shots. The speed of the M10 allowed them to set up new ambushes multiple times in a single fight. They mastered the use of dust and smoke after firing to cover their immediate withdrawal. This emphasis on combined arms and teamwork was a massive force multiplier for the lightly armored M10. The German command had failed to anticipate this level of aggressive, coordinated anti-tank maneuver. The M10's lethal capacity stemmed almost entirely from its main gun, the high-velocity 3-inch, 76.2 mm M7, which relied on kinetic energy for its destructive effect. Unlike the multipurpose guns found on most tanks, the M7 was designed for a single task: to propel an armor-piercing projectile at maximum speed. The standard round used for combating heavy German armor was the armor-piercing, capped, ballistic-capped, or APC-BC projectile. This specialized ammunition featured a pointed cap to improve its aerodynamics and a softer cap to prevent the round from shattering on impact with the sloped armor plate. The sheer velocity of the round was its primary weapon, concentrating immense force into a small area of the Panther's protective plate. Despite this, the M7 gun still struggled against the Panthers' thick, well-angled glacis plate at typical engagement ranges. The M10 crews had to rely on a few key factors to ensure a successful kill, the first of which was proximity. Closing the range significantly increased the round's penetration power. The second and most crucial factor was shot placement. The Panther's side and rear armor were drastically thinner than its front, making them the only reliable kill zones. Crews were rigorously trained to wait for the perfect moment, a slight turn in the road, a pause in the advance, to expose the vulnerable flanks. The introduction of tungsten-cored high-velocity armor-piercing (HVAP) ammunition later in the war provided a much-needed boost in penetration, effectively allowing the M10 to engage Panthers frontally, though these rounds remained scarce. Even with the standard round, a successful flank shot would result in a catastrophic penetration, often sending deadly spall, or hot metal fragments, ricocheting inside the German tank's fighting compartment. This internal fragmentation was often more lethal than the hull itself, frequently igniting ammunition or fuel and causing the Panther to erupt in a fireball. The velocity of the M10's gun was a testament to the idea that tactical advantage could sometimes outweigh brute force, proving the lethality of a precision strike over a prolonged bombardment. The M7 gun proved that kinetic energy, delivered with precision, was the great equalizer on the battlefield. The difference in armor thickness between the Panther's glacis and its sides was a vulnerability the M10 fully exploited. APC-BC rounds were designed to maximize penetration by reducing the risk of a glancing hit on the slope. The rare HVAP rounds were treated like gold, reserved only for the most critical engagements. The M10 gunner's skill was therefore measured not just by speed, but by their cold, calculated accuracy. The goal was always a non-penetrating kill, but an internal catastrophe caused by fragmentation. The legendary M10 ambushes were a masterclass in tactical patience and exploitation of the ground, particularly within the dense, high hedgerows of Normandy. The concept was simple yet devastatingly effective, remained completely hidden until the enemy tank was within the M10's optimal firing range and its most vulnerable side was exposed. The American crews became experts at camouflage, using local foliage, dirt, and even discarded farm equipment to seamlessly integrate their tall vehicles into the surrounding landscape. They would often prepare their positions days in advance, digging shallow defilades to lower their profile and ensuring they had a clear, pre-sighted field of fire across a known enemy approach route. The key was to choose a location where the Panther would be unable to easily traverse its turret for a rapid response, such as a narrow dirt road or a choke point between two buildings. Once the German armor entered the kill zone, the M10 commander's signal would unleash a concentrated volley of fire, often coordinated with multiple tank destroyers for maximum shock effect. The initial rounds were typically aimed at the turret ring or the side hull, aiming to cripple the Panther's ability to fight back and ideally cause an internal explosion. The sound of a 76mm round impacting the side of a Panther was often described as a deafening, metallic gong, quickly followed by the distinct sound of the tank's inner workings being ripped apart. After the ambush was sprung, the M10 crews followed their doctrine to the letter, rapidly displacing from their position even before the smoke cleared. They understood that the counter-battery fire, typically mortars or artillery called in by the surviving German infantry, would be swift and accurate, making their continued presence a death sentence. The element of surprise was the M10's most powerful armor, and their ability to repeatedly execute these sudden, close-range ambushes turned the Norman countryside into a minefield for the previously untouchable Panther crews. Concealment was paramount for their survival. they had to disappear into the landscape. The pre-sighting of landmarks allowed for immediate and accurate fire when the moment came. Crew discipline meant resisting the urge to fire too early, ensuring the target was perfectly vulnerable. The coordinated volley was designed to overwhelm the Panthers' crew and systems simultaneously. The target zones, like the turret ring, were chosen to mechanically immobilize the tank. Leaving the ambush site immediately was an ingrained reflex, a non-negotiable part of the doctrine. The ambushes forced German armor to slow down and use costly infantry screening, disrupting their overall plan. The nickname Wolverine, informally given to the M10, perfectly encapsulated the vehicle's fighting spirit: tenacious, fast, and capable of inflicting disproportionate damage when cornered or striking from surprise. These ambushes often had a profound and demoralizing psychological effect on the German armored forces. The Panthers, built for superiority, were not mentally prepared to be stalked and suddenly eliminated by a vehicle they had dismissed as a cheap compromise. The M10 crews, often young but hardened veterans, developed a fierce pride in their unconventional role and lethal efficiency. Their work was dangerous and unforgiving, demanding constant vigilance and a willingness to take extreme risks to get the perfect shot. Success was not measured in surviving a long tank battle, but in the sudden, violent destruction of a tank that was supposed to be invulnerable. Reports from German lines indicated growing frustration and fear, as the sight of a shattered Panther or the loss of a commander to an unseen, devastating shot began to erode their confidence. The Allied forces learned to exploit this fear, using the tank destroyer battalions as psychological warfare tools to slow and disrupt German armored movements. When a Panther column was reported, the M10s were often deployed to forward areas, knowing their presence alone would force the German commanders to adopt a far more cautious and time-consuming approach. The fury of the Wolverines was the cumulative effect of these repeated, successful ambushes, changing the German perception of the M10 from a joke to a genuinely feared and deadly opponent. The tank destroyer motto, "Seek, strike, and destroy," was proven true in the smoke and wreckage of the European battlefield, with the M10 emerging as a symbol of American tactical ingenuity and crew determination. The psychological shift from contempt to fear was a significant, unquantifiable victory for the M10 crews. German tankers began to fear the unseen enemy, leading to hesitation and poor tactical decisions. The M10 crews took their nickname to heart, embracing the role of the scrappy, deadly underdog. Their reputation preceded them, turning the anticipation of an M10 ambush into a major tactical consideration for the Germans. The Wolverines demonstrated that morale could be a crucial component of tank-on-tank warfare. Each destroyed Panther was a psychological blow to the German belief in their technological supremacy. The tenacity and courage of these crews ultimately earned them the respect of the entire Allied force. The most distinctive feature of the M10, the open-top turret, was a constant source of controversy and a major operational hazard. The design choice was deliberate, intended to provide the commander and crew with a superior view of the surrounding terrain, which was essential for their prescribed ambush tactics. In theory, the open top allowed the commander to stand and rotate with the turret, providing nearly 360-degree vision and enhancing the crucial ability to spot enemy armor first. However, this tactical advantage came at a heavy cost to the crew's physical safety in every single engagement. The lack of a roof meant the crew was fully exposed to the high-angle threats that dominate a modern battlefield, including artillery shrapnel, mortar fragments, and the ever-present danger of a German sniper. A direct hit from a mortar or a high-explosive round exploding nearby could instantly incapacitate the entire fighting compartment, turning the vehicle into a death trap. German infantry quickly learned to exploit this weakness, targeting the open turret with hand grenades during close-quarters fighting in towns and forests. In response, many M10 crews took improvised measures, fabricating crude metal plates or canvas covers to offer some minimal protection, a testament to the design's inherent risk. Despite the danger, the superior visibility remained a vital asset, allowing the crews to quickly identify the vulnerable flanks of the Panther and to coordinate their rapid repositioning. It was a trade-off that defined the M10's operational reality: maximum tactical awareness in exchange for minimum physical protection. This inherent vulnerability only served to underscore the necessity of their shoot-and-scoot doctrine, proving that the M10 could only survive by avoiding being hit in the first place. The open top was both the tank destroyer's tactical eye and its Achilles heel, demanding a level of situational awareness and sheer courage from its crew that few other armored vehicles required. The need for superior observation trumped the desire for full overhead armor protection. Commanders literally had their heads on a swivel, constantly exposed to the sky and the dangers it carried. The noise of a nearby mortar round exploding was a terrifying reality for the unprotected crews. Improvisation became common, with crews desperately seeking any way to minimize the risk of overhead attack. The exposed nature of the crew meant that communication was easier, but the price was fear. The open turret required a level of bravery that was distinct even among armored units. It was a design feature that demanded perfection from its users. There was little room for error. The experience of fighting in Normandy and the subsequent push across France forced an immediate and dramatic evolution in the leadership of the tank destroyer battalions. The pre-war doctrine, conceived in the relative safety of training camps, quickly collided with the reality of facing superior German armor like the Panther and Tiger. Commanders learned almost overnight that strict adherence to the defensive, linear deployment of the doctrine would lead to catastrophic losses. The successful commanders were those who were flexible, innovative, and willing to push the boundaries of their orders to match the fluid nature of armored combat. They began to integrate their M10s much more closely with the infantry and tank units they were supporting, often creating highly localized and customized ambush plans. Instead of waiting for a mass German attack, they became proactive hunters, sending reconnaissance teams forward to identify and destroy armored threats before they could be fully mobilized. This shift represented a move away from the static, cordon defense model to a far more aggressive, mobile defense approach, often described as fire brigade tactics. Crucially, the best commanders mastered the logistics of the ambush, ensuring their vehicles were always fueled, rearmed with the latest ammunition, and positioned along likely German avenues of advance. They also had to manage the mental toll on their crews, who knew they were facing tanks they could not easily defeat in a stand-up fight, making leadership as much about morale as it was about maneuver. The lessons learned in the field, from the critical importance of flank security to the optimal angle for the 3-inch gun's penetration, were constantly fed back up the chain of command, resulting in rapid doctrinal updates. This continuous learning process, driven by the pressure of facing the elite SS and Wehrmacht panzer forces, ultimately forged the tank destroyer battalions into one of the most feared and effective anti-tank forces of the American Army. Flexibility became the hallmark of effective tank destroyer command in the field. The official doctrine was a starting point, but on the ground, commanders had to improvise constantly. Integrating seamlessly with infantry units provided crucial protection and superior forward observation. Proactive hunting was a psychological game, seizing the initiative from the heavier German units. The fire brigade concept meant rapidly moving to plug gaps in the line wherever a German armored thrust occurred. Logistical mastery ensured the M10s were never caught flat-footed without fuel or the right ammunition. Maintaining crew morale was a daily challenge, given the inherent danger of their lightly protected vehicles. The commanders acted as a crucial feedback loop, ensuring field experience informed future training. This evolution from rigid adherence to flexible aggression defined their success in the European theater. The ultimate vindication of the M10 tank destroyer and its crews arrived during the brutal, freezing winter of the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. The German surprise offensive, Operation Watch on the Rhine, relied on a massive armored thrust through the lightly defended Ardennes forest, with the goal of reaching the port of Antwerp. Suddenly, the M10 units were thrust into a desperate, mobile defensive battle, often fighting isolated actions at key road junctions against overwhelming numbers of German tanks, including many Panthers and the dreaded Tiger IIS. The open terrain and clear, cold weather of the Ardennes, while exposing the crews to the elements, also provided excellent lines of sight for the long-range engagements that became critical. The M10's crews, now veterans of the Normandy fighting, used every ounce of their cunning and experience to hold the line. At crucial points like the defense of Bastogne, the tank destroyers played an essential, life-saving role, often being the only available armor capable of challenging the heavy German attack. Their hit-and-run tactics, refined over months of combat, allowed them to inflict heavy losses on the advancing SS Panzer divisions, forcing them to divert time and resources to clearing out the persistent M10 nests. This fierce, delaying action was crucial to the Allied defense, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive and stabilize the front. The Wolverines, fighting in the snow and ice, proved that their effectiveness was not limited to the dense confines of the bocage. Their speed was vital in rapidly shifting between threatened sectors, providing desperately needed anti-tank firepower exactly where and when it was required. The Battle of the Bulge confirmed the M10's place in history, showcasing its crew's tenacity and the enduring relevance of their tactical doctrine against the most powerful tanks the German army could field. The German offensive was a massive gamble that the M10 crews were instrumental in defeating. The freezing conditions added a layer of brutal difficulty to their already perilous mission. Facing the massive Tiger II was the ultimate test of the M10's doctrine and the 3-inch gun. The need for speed in the rapidly changing front line was perfectly suited to the M10's design. The defense of key crossroads became battles of will, held by the tenacious Wolverines. Their success forced the German columns to slow down, burning precious fuel and time. The M10 was arguably the most important high-velocity anti-tank weapon available to the Americans early in the Bulge. The courage of the crews, exposed to the snow and German fire, became legendary. The M10 tank destroyer would eventually be phased out of service, replaced by the more potent and fully enclosed M36 Jackson, which featured a much more powerful 90mm main gun. However, the M10 story is not one of obsolescence but of a vehicle that dramatically changed the perceptions of armored warfare. Its success proved the efficacy of a dedicated tank hunting force operating under a doctrine of high mobility and disciplined ambush, a concept that continues to influence military thinking today. The mocking laughter of the SS officers at the M10's open-top design and relatively light armor was ultimately drowned out by the thunder of the 3-inch gun and the flames erupting from the wrecks of their Panther tanks. The M10 taught the German army a hard lesson: technological superiority in a single vehicle did not guarantee victory against a well-trained, flexible, and cleverly deployed opposing force. The M10 crews, the tank destroyer men, earned their reputation as elite fighters who excelled in a mission that was often suicidal, relying on cunning and teamwork over brute force. They became a living testament to the military maxim that a target's vulnerability is often dictated by the skill of the hunter, not the thickness of its armor. Today, the surviving M10s stand as poignant monuments to the early days of the Western Front, their ungainly appearance belying the sheer destructive power they wielded against the German war machine. The tank destroyer concept, as embodied by the Wolverine, proved that a glass cannon, when handled by masters of the ambush, could shred the metal hide of the most feared predator on the battlefield. The M10 remains a powerful symbol of Allied ingenuity and the unwavering resolve of the crews who took on the Panther and won. The evolution of tank destroyers from M10 to M36 showed the continuous learning process of the U.S. Army. The fundamental principles of high mobility and concentrated fire remain relevant in modern anti-tank warfare. The M10 forced a re-evaluation of German tank doctrine, moving away from pure heavy armor supremacy. Veterans of the tank destroyer battalions often spoke with fierce pride about their unique, dangerous role. Their success was a victory for doctrine and training over sheer technological might. The open top, once mocked, became a symbol of the commander's superior battlefield vision. The M10's legacy is a story of tactical brilliance overcoming brute force.